The doorbell rang at exactly 7 p.m., just as I was putting the final touches on the roast beef dinner. My lawyer stood on my doorstep, his usually composed face etched with concern. What he told me about my beloved daughter-in-law would shatter everything I believed about family, trust, and the woman who had convinced me to give up my life savings. If you are watching this, please subscribe and let me know in the comments where you are watching from. This story changed my life in ways I never could have imagined, and it all started with what seemed like the perfect addition to our small family. My name is Eleanor Mason, and 8 months ago, I thought I had won the mother-in-law lottery. My son David had finally found happiness with Isabella, a brilliant pediatric surgeon who treated me like the mother she had lost too young. When they needed financial help for their dream home, I did not hesitate to liquidate my retirement accounts. After all, family comes first, and Isabella had promised I would always be welcome in their beautiful new house. That evening, I was arranging fresh roses from my small garden when my phone rang. It was Thomas Wright, my attorney of 20 years. Thomas never called after business hours unless something was terribly wrong. "Eleanor," he said, his voice strained with tension, "I need to see you immediately. Can you come to my office right now?" The urgency in his tone made my stomach clench with dread. "Thomas, what is this about? Is David all right?" "David is fine," he said carefully. "But Eleanor, this is about Isabella. About your son's wife. I need to show you something that cannot wait until tomorrow." 20 minutes later, I sat in Thomas's office while he spread documents across his mahogany desk. The fluorescent lights seemed harsh against the evening darkness outside, casting everything in an unforgiving glare. "Eleanor," he began slowly, "remember when you asked me to update your will last month? I had my investigator do routine background checks on the new beneficiaries you wanted to add. That is when we discovered something troubling about Isabella." "What do you mean troubling?" I asked, though my heart was already racing. "Isabella Rodriguez Mason does not exist, Eleanor. At least not the version your son married." The words hit me like a physical blow. "That is impossible, Thomas. Isabella is a pediatric surgeon at Metropolitan Hospital. She graduated from Johns Hopkins. She lost her family in a house fire when she was in medical school." "Eleanor," Thomas said gently, "there is no record of an Isabella Rodriguez ever attending Johns Hopkins Medical School. There is no record of her working at Metropolitan Hospital. The woman your son married has been living under a false identity." I stared at the documents he pushed toward me, my vision blurring with shock and disbelief. Bank records, employment verification requests that had been denied, educational transcripts that did not exist. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. "How is this possible?" I whispered. "She performs surgeries. She talks about her patients. I've seen her medical journals." Thomas opened another file. "Our investigator followed up on every detail she has shared with your family. The medical journals belong to a real doctor named Isabella Rodriguez who died in a car accident 3 years ago. The woman living with your son has assumed her identity." As I drove to David's house that night, my hands trembling on the steering wheel, I thought about how eagerly I had embraced Isabella when David brought her home 18 months ago. Maybe I had wanted a daughter so desperately that I ignored the warning signs. Isabella had seemed so perfect for David, so attentive to his needs and so respectful of our family traditions. She had been the one who suggested I sell my house and move closer to them. "Mom Mason," she had said over coffee in her pristine kitchen, "that old neighborhood is getting rougher every year. And honestly, this house is too big for David and me. We have been thinking about upgrading to something with more space for the family we want to start." She had painted such a beautiful picture of 3 generations living in harmony, of me being an integral part of their future children's lives. When they needed $80,000 for the down payment on their dream house, I liquidated my retirement accounts without a second thought. Now, pulling into their driveway behind David's Mercedes, I felt nauseated. The house they had bought with my money looked so perfect in the moonlight, with its manicured landscaping and designer outdoor lighting. Through the front windows, I could see them moving around inside, probably preparing for bed like any normal married couple. I sat in my car for several minutes, watching them through those windows. David looked happy, relaxed, completely unaware that his wife was a stranger. Isabella moved with the same graceful confidence she always displayed, the confidence I had admired but now recognized as the poise of a practiced deceiver. When I finally rang the doorbell, David answered with surprise and delight. "Mom, what a wonderful surprise. Come in, come in. Isabella will be so happy to see you." He looked genuinely pleased, which made what I had to do even more heartbreaking. "Everything all right?" he asked, noticing my expression. "You look a little pale." "Just tired," I said, following him into their living room. "Is Isabella around? I need to talk to both of you about something important." Isabella appeared from the kitchen, wearing silk pajamas and a warm smile. "Mom Mason," she said, embracing me with the same affection she had shown for over a year. "What brings you by so late? Is everything okay?" I studied her face, looking for any sign of the deception Thomas had revealed. But she looked exactly like the loving daughter-in-law I had grown to adore. Her concern seemed genuine, her smile warm and welcoming. "I need to ask you both something," I said carefully, taking a seat on their expensive sofa. "Isabella, I was updating my will recently, and my attorney needed some background information. He had trouble verifying your employment at Metropolitan Hospital." For just a moment, something flickered across Isabella's face. It was so quick I almost missed it, but now that I knew what to look for, I saw the brief flash of calculation before her expression settled back into confusion. "That is strange," she said, sitting down next to David. "What kind of trouble?" "Hospital employment records are usually straightforward." "They could not find any record of you working there," I said, watching her carefully. "In fact, they could not find any record of an Isabella Rodriguez ever being employed by Metropolitan Hospital." David frowned and turned to his wife. "That does not make sense, Isabella. Maybe they looked in the wrong department. You work in pediatric surgery, not general medicine." Isabella took David's hand and squeezed it, a gesture that would have looked loving if I had not known what I knew. "There must be some mistake," she said. "Hospital record-keeping can be complicated, especially when departments merge or systems get updated. I can call HR tomorrow and straighten this out." "What about Johns Hopkins?" "Press. My attorney also had trouble finding records of your medical school attendance." This time the pause was longer. Isabella looked genuinely surprised, but I was beginning to understand that every expression on her face was carefully crafted. "That is very strange," she said finally. "I graduated in 2018. Perhaps there was a data breach or system migration that affected older records." David was looking increasingly uncomfortable. "Mom," he said gently, "what exactly is your attorney suggesting?" "That Isabella is lying about her background." I looked at my son, my successful, intelligent son who had been completely fooled by a woman who saw him as nothing more than a means to an end. Before I could answer, my phone buzzed with a text from Thomas. "Check your email now." "Excuse me for just a moment," I said, opening my email. Thomas had sent me a photograph with a brief message. "This is the real Isabella Rodriguez, the doctor who died 3 years ago." I stared at the photo, my blood running cold. The real Isabella Rodriguez looked nothing like the woman sitting across from me. She had been blonde and petite, with completely different facial features. I turned my phone screen toward David and the woman who had been calling herself his wife. "This is Isabella Rodriguez," I said quietly. "The real Isabella Rodriguez, who died in a car accident 3 years ago." The silence in the room was deafening. David stared at the photograph, then at the woman beside him, confusion and dawning horror spreading across his face. The woman I had known as Isabella stood up slowly, and when she looked at me again, all pretense had vanished. Her warm, caring expression was gone, replaced by cold calculation and barely contained fury. "You have no idea what you have done," she said, her voice completely different now. Lower, harder, without any trace of the loving daughter-in-law I thought I had known. David was staring at her as if seeing her for the first time. "Isabella," he whispered, "what is she talking about? Who are you?" "My name is Victoria Sterling," she said, her transformation complete. "And you people have been remarkably easy to manipulate." The next few hours passed in a blur of police sirens, detective interviews, and devastating revelations. Victoria Sterling was not just identity thief. She was a professional marriage fraud specialist who had been operating across multiple states for nearly a decade. Detective Sarah Chen, a woman about my age with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, explained the scope of Victoria's operation while we sat in David's living room, now a crime scene. "Mrs. Mason," she said, "your quick thinking may have prevented a much larger theft. Based on the evidence we found in Mrs. Sterling's belongings, she was planning to access your son's life insurance policy and your remaining retirement funds within the next few weeks." "How many others?" David asked, his voice hollow. "How many other families has she destroyed?" "We have identified at least 12 other victims across 5 states," Detective Chen replied. "The total amount stolen is approaching $2 million. I felt sick thinking about other mothers who had given their life savings to help their children, only to watch it disappear into the pockets of a professional predator. Other men like David who had been manipulated into believing they had found their soulmate. What are the chances we will get our money back?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "Honestly," Detective Chen said, "recovery in these cases is usually minimal. The money moves through multiple accounts and jurisdictions very quickly. However, your cooperation will help us prevent future victims and possibly recover assets from her other operations." After the police left, David and I sat in his kitchen, surrounded by the remnants of Victoria's carefully constructed deception. Her coffee mug still sat in the sink, her reading glasses on the counter, her jacket hanging on the back of a chair as if she had just stepped out for a moment. "I have to ask you something, Mom," David said quietly. "And I need you to be completely honest with me." I braced myself, expecting him to ask if I had always suspected something was wrong, if I had failed to protect him somehow. "Did you really liquidate your entire retirement account for us?" he asked instead. "The house, the furniture, the vacation fund you mentioned. Was all of that your money?" The pain in his voice broke my heart. "Most of it," I admitted. "I kept enough to live on, but yes, I gave you nearly everything I had saved." David buried his face in his hands. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I never asked you to do that. I thought you had plenty of money set aside." "You did not ask," I said gently. "I offered because I thought I was helping you build a life with someone who loved you. We were both deceived, David. The difference is you fell in love with a lie. I just fell for a performance." Over the following days, the investigation revealed the full scope of Victoria's deception. She had not just stolen our money. She had systematically isolated David from his friends, convinced him to change jobs to a position that required more travel, and gradually assumed control over every aspect of their household finances. The medical journals I had seen were photocopies of real doctors' notes she had somehow obtained. The hospital calls she took were from accomplices who helped maintain her cover story. Even her emotional reactions to stories about her supposed dead family had been rehearsed and perfected through years of practice. Detective Chen called a week later with more disturbing news. "Mrs. Mason," she said, "we found something else in Victoria's belongings that you need to know about." "What kind of something?" I asked, dreading the answer. "She had detailed plans for what she called the final phase of your son's marriage. Notes about how to make your son's death look accidental, timing charts for when she would have access to his life insurance, and research into your health conditions and medication." The words hit me like ice water. She was planning to kill him. "And possibly you as well," Detective Chen said quietly. "Her notes suggest she viewed both of you as obstacles to her long-term financial goals." When I told David about this final revelation, he sat in stunned silence for several minutes. Then he looked at me with an expression I had never seen before. A mixture of gratitude, horror, and something that looked like awe. "You saved my life, Mom," he said simply. "If you had not investigated her background, if you had not trusted your instincts, I might be dead within a year." "We saved each other," I corrected. "You gave me a reason to be suspicious when you looked so tired and stressed every time I saw you. I just did not understand why until it was almost too late." The trial began 4 months later. Victoria Sterling, whose real name turned out to be Amanda Price, was a 38-year-old former pharmaceutical sales representative who had discovered that marriage fraud was more profitable than selling medications. Sitting in that courtroom, listening to prosecutor detail the scope of her crimes, I felt a strange mixture of anger and pity. Amanda had been brilliant in her way, creating elaborate backstories and maintaining multiple identities across several states. But she had used her intelligence to destroy families and steal people's dreams of love and security. When it came time for victim impact statements, I stood up and looked directly at the woman who had nearly destroyed my family. "You did not just steal our money," I said, my voice steady despite the emotions churning inside me. "You stole a year of my son's life. You stole his ability to trust. You made him doubt his own judgment and isolated him from people who actually cared about him. But most importantly," I continued, "you underestimated the power of a mother's instinct. You thought I was just a convenient source of funding, an old woman too lonely and desperate for family to ask hard questions. You were wrong." Amanda stared at me throughout my statement, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she leaned over to whisper something to her attorney, but she never looked away from my face. The judge sentenced Amanda to 15 years in federal prison and ordered her to pay restitution to all identified victims. We would eventually recover about 40% of what we had lost, enough for me to maintain my modest lifestyle but not enough to restore the comfortable retirement I had planned. 8 months after Amanda's arrest, David and I were having dinner at my new apartment, a cozy 2-bedroom place I had chosen because I genuinely liked it, not because someone else had convinced me I needed it. "I got a letter today," David said, pulling an envelope from his jacket pocket. "From one of Amanda's other victims in Colorado. His wife forwarded it after he died of a heart attack last month." "What did he say?" I asked, though I was not sure I wanted to know. "He thanked us for coming forward. Said knowing other people had been fooled the same way helped him feel less ashamed. And he wanted us to know that our testimony helped convict the woman who destroyed his marriage and his faith in love." I looked at my son, who was slowly returning to the person he had been before Amanda had systematically undermined his confidence and isolated him from his support system. "Do you think you will ever trust anyone enough to marry again?" I asked gently. David considered the question carefully. "Think so," he said finally. "But next time I am definitely introducing her to you much earlier in the relationship. Your instincts are apparently better than mine." I laughed, the first genuinely joyful sound I had made in months. My instincts told me something was wrong, but I ignored them for months because I wanted so badly to believe in the perfect daughter-in-law. "What changed?" David asked. "What finally made you investigate her?" "Honestly, it was the way she talked about money. She always knew exactly how much everything cost, exactly what everyone could afford, exactly when financial decisions needed to be made. She was too interested in numbers and not interested enough in feelings." As the months passed, David and I developed a closer relationship than we had ever had before. The crisis had stripped away all the polite distance that had grown between us over the years and reminded us that family, real family, was worth protecting. I also discovered something surprising about myself. At 71 years old, I was stronger and more resourceful than I had given myself credit for. I had not just been a victim in this situation. I had been a detective, an advocate, and ultimately a protector. Detective Chen stayed in touch, updating us on the broader investigation that had grown from our case. Amanda's arrest had led to the discovery of an entire network of marriage fraudsters operating across the western United States. "Mrs. Mason," she told me during one of our calls, "your case was the key that unlocked everything." Amanda was the most sophisticated operator we had encountered, and catching her led us to at least 6 other people running similar schemes. "How many victims altogether?" I asked. "Over 200 confirmed cases," Detective Chen said. "Total losses approaching $8 million. Many of the victims are elderly people who lost their entire life savings." The numbers were staggering, but what bothered me more was thinking about the emotional damage. 200 people who had opened their hearts to someone who viewed them as nothing more than a business opportunity. 1 year after Amanda's sentencing, I received an unexpected phone call. "Mrs. Mason, this is Jennifer Walsh from Channel 7 News. We are doing a documentary about marriage fraud, and we would like to interview you about your experience. I was initially reluctant to share our story publicly, but David encouraged me to participate. Mom, he said, think about how many people might avoid becoming victims if they hear what happened to us. The documentary aired 6 months later, and the response was overwhelming. Hundreds of people reached out to share their own stories of financial manipulation and romantic deception. Many of them thanked us for making them feel less alone and less ashamed. But the most meaningful response came from a woman named Patricia, whose email arrived the day after the documentary aired. Mrs. Mason, she wrote, I watched your interview last night while sitting in my car outside my fiancé's house. I had driven there to confront him about some financial discrepancies I had discovered, but I was planning to believe whatever explanation he gave me because I did not want to lose him. After hearing your story, I went home instead and hired a private investigator. It turns out my fiancé has been married 3 times before and has stolen over $200,000 from previous wives. I am canceling our wedding and pressing charges. Thank you for giving me the courage to trust my instincts. Reading Patricia's email, I felt a sense of purpose I had not experienced since my husband died 12 years earlier. Our terrible experience had prevented another family from going through the same devastation. 2 years later, David met Sarah, a school teacher who actually was who she claimed to be. Their courtship was slow and careful, with David insisting on meeting her family, visiting her workplace, and thoroughly understanding her background before making any emotional commitments. I liked Sarah immediately, not because she was charming or accommodating but because she was real. She had opinions David disagreed with, she had flaws she admitted openly, and she had a past she discussed honestly. She was everything Amanda had pretended to be but never was. An authentic human being. When David proposed to Sarah, he asked me to help him pick out the ring. As we sat in the jewelry store looking at diamonds and talking about love, I realized how much we had both healed. Are you nervous? Asked him. About getting married again. Terrified, he admitted with a laugh. But it is the good kind of terrified, the kind that means something matters to you. With Amanda, I was never nervous because some part of me always knew it was too good to be true. With Sarah, I am nervous because I know it is real. Their wedding was small and simple, held in Sarah's parents' backyard with 40 close friends and family members. As I watched David dance with his new wife, I thought about how different this celebration felt from the elaborate production Amanda had orchestrated. This wedding was about 2 people who knew each other's faults and chose to commit to each other anyway. Amanda's wedding had been about creating the perfect image of romance while hiding the calculated deception underneath. During the reception, Sarah's maid of honor gave a toast that brought tears to my eyes. She talked about how Sarah had waited until she found someone who loved her for who she really was, not for who she could pretend to be. After the reception, as David and Sarah left for their honeymoon, Sarah hugged me goodbye and whispered, "Thank you for protecting him until I could find him." 3 years have passed since Amanda's arrest, and David and Sarah are expecting their first child. As I prepare to become a grandmother, I think about the lessons this experience taught me about family, trust, and the importance of listening to your instincts. Amanda took a lot from us. Money, time, peace of mind, and faith in others. But she also gave us something valuable, though I doubt she intended to. She reminded us that real love does not require perfection or performance. Real love survives questions, doubts, and hard conversations. Most importantly, she taught me that being protective is not the same as being suspicious, and that sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to believe a beautiful lie. I still live in my modest apartment, still careful with money but not afraid to spend it on things that matter. I have traveled more in the past 3 years than I did in the previous 10, and I have made new friends who know my story and admire my courage. Detective Chen retired last year, but she still sends me updates when marriage fraud cases are solved using techniques developed during Amanda's investigation. The network we helped expose has been completely dismantled, and new protocols are now in place to help identify and prevent these schemes. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had not asked Thomas to investigate Amanda's background, if I had continued to believe in the perfect daughter-in-law who seemed to love our family so much. David would probably be dead by now, killed in an accident that no one would have questioned. I might have died as well, another elderly victim of a tragic coincidence. Amanda would have inherited everything and moved on to her next victim, her next carefully crafted identity, her next family to destroy. Instead, she is in prison, David is married to a woman who actually loves him, and I am about to become a grandmother. Sometimes the best outcomes come from the worst experiences. If you are watching this story and something about your own relationship does not feel right, trust that instinct. Ask questions even if you are afraid of the answers. Real love can survive scrutiny, but deception cannot. And if you are a parent or grandparent worried about a family member's relationship, do not be afraid to investigate. The people who love us should be able to withstand examination. If they cannot, that tells you everything you need to know. 5 years later, I am holding my granddaughter Emma while David and Sarah work in their garden. Emma has David's eyes and Sarah's smile, and she is absolutely real in a way that fills my heart with joy. As I watch this little family I helped protect, I realize that Amanda Sterling's greatest failure was not understanding what she was really stealing from. She thought she was taking money from lonely, desperate people. Instead, she was attacking love itself. The bonds between parents and children, the trust between spouses, the hope that families can support each other through anything. She did not understand that real families fight for each other, that real love is worth defending, and that mothers will go to extraordinary lengths to protect their children, even when those children are grown adults who think they can take care of themselves. Emma falls asleep in my arms as the sun sets over Sarah's garden. In a few years I will tell her this story, age-appropriately of course, because I want her to understand that love is powerful but it is not naive, that trust is precious but it is not blind, and that family means never being too polite to ask the hard questions. Most of all, I want her to know that being strong enough to investigate when something feels wrong is not a sign of weakness or suspicion. It is a sign of wisdom. As I rock my granddaughter to sleep, I think about all the families who were not as fortunate as ours, who lost everything to people like Amanda and never recovered. I think about the trust that was broken, the dreams that were shattered, the elderly people who spent their final years in poverty because they believed in someone who saw them as nothing more than a target. But I also think about Patricia, who avoided marrying her own version of Amanda because our story gave her courage. I think about the other potential victims who were saved because Amanda's network was exposed. I think about the new laws and protections that were put in place because of cases like ours. Sometimes one family's nightmare can become another family's salvation. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you can prevent the same worst thing from happening to someone else. The hardest part of our experience was not losing the money or even discovering that David's wife was a fraud. The hardest part was realizing how close we came to losing each other forever. How Amanda's final plan would have left me completely alone in the world and robbed Emma of the father she deserves. But we survived, we recovered, and we learned to trust again. More carefully this time, but not fearfully. We learned the difference between healthy skepticism and paranoid suspicion, between protecting your family and controlling them. As Emma grows up, she will learn about stranger danger and online safety and all the modern ways people can be deceived. But I hope she also learns that the best protection against deception is not isolation. It is connection to people who really know you, really love you, and really want what is best for you. David and Sarah have built a marriage based on honesty, even when honesty is uncomfortable. They argue sometimes, they disagree about money and parenting and where to spend holidays. But they argue as themselves, not as characters they are pretending to be. That is what Amanda never understood about real relationships. They are messy and imperfect and sometimes frustrating, but they are built on truth. Her performances were flawless, but they were not sustainable because they were not real. As I prepare to hand Emma back to her parents and return to my apartment, I feel grateful for the life I have built from the ruins of Amanda's deception. It is smaller than the life I planned, but it is entirely mine, chosen by me, lived authentically. I have enough money to live comfortably, friends who know my story and love me anyway, a son who trusts me completely, a daughter-in-law who values my wisdom, and a granddaughter who will grow up knowing that her grandmother is the kind of woman who fights for her family. That is a legacy worth having, a story worth telling, and a life worth living. Thank you for listening to our story. If it helps even one person avoid what we went through, then everything we endured was worthwhile. Do not forget to subscribe to this channel and share your thoughts in the comments. Your stories matter, your experiences matter, and your voices can help protect other families from the kind of deception that nearly destroyed ours. Remember, real love does not require you to give up your life savings. Real family does not isolate you from other people who care about you, and real relationships can survive being questioned. Trust your instincts, protect your family, and never be afraid to investigate when something feels wrong. Sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to believe a beautiful lie. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is ask one more question, make one more phone call, or hire one investigator to verify what you desperately want to be true. And sometimes, just sometimes, that decision to trust your instincts instead of your hopes can save everything that really matters. Thank you for watching, and remember, your family is worth fighting for. But let me tell you about what happened after the cameras stopped rolling after the documentary aired, and after we thought our story was over. Because sometimes the most important chapters come after you think the book has ended. 6 months after David and Sarah's wedding, I received a phone call that would change my perspective on everything we had been through. The voice on the other end was shaky, elderly, and filled with a desperation I recognized immediately. "Mrs. Mason," the woman said, "my name is Dorothy Chen. I saw your documentary, and I think the same thing is happening to my son right now. Can you please help me?" Dorothy was 78 years old, living in Phoenix, and watching her 52-year-old widowed son fall under the spell of a woman who claimed to be a veterinarian named Michelle Parker. The similarities to our situation were chilling. Michelle had appeared in Dorothy's son Robert's life just 6 months after his wife died of cancer. She was attentive, caring, and had immediately bonded with Dorothy, calling her Grandma Dorothy and visiting her nursing home every week with flowers and homemade cookies. "She sounds wonderful," I said carefully. "What makes you suspicious?" Dorothy's voice dropped to a whisper. "The other residents here love her, but something about her visits feels wrong. She asks too many questions about Robert's job, about his insurance, about what I left him when his father died. And last week, I overheard her on the phone in the hallway talking about timeline acceleration and final phase preparation. My blood ran cold. Those were almost exactly the same phrases Amanda had used in her notes about David and me. "Dorothy," I said, "have you shared your concerns with Robert?" "I tried," she said, beginning to cry. "But he thinks I am just a jealous old woman who does not want him to be happy. He said Michelle makes him feel alive again after losing Patricia. He is talking about proposing next month." I spent the next 3 hours on the phone with Dorothy, gathering details about Michelle Parker and her relationship with Robert. By the end of our conversation, I was convinced we were dealing with another Amanda Sterling. The next morning I called Detective Chen, who had retired but still consulted on marriage fraud cases. "Sarah," I said, "I think we have another one." Within 48 hours, Detective Chen had connected with Phoenix police and begun an investigation into Michelle Parker. What they found was exactly what I had feared and exactly what Dorothy had suspected. Michelle Parker did not exist. The woman courting Robert Chen was actually Linda Vasquez, a former insurance adjuster who had been operating marriage fraud schemes across Arizona and Nevada for the past 5 years. But this case was different in a disturbing way. Linda had learned from Amanda's mistakes. She was moving faster, being more aggressive, and had already convinced Robert to make her the beneficiary of his life insurance policy just 4 months into their relationship. More alarmingly, Linda had been researching ways to make Robert's death look like a heart attack. Detective Chen found searches on Linda's computer for undetectable poisons and heart medication interactions. We were not just looking at marriage fraud this time. We were potentially looking at premeditated murder. The challenge was convincing Robert that his beloved Michelle was planning to kill him. Unlike David, who had begun to have doubts about Amanda, Robert was completely under Linda's spell. Dorothy and I flew to Phoenix together, 2 mothers determined to save Dorothy's son from the same fate David had barely escaped. Sitting next to Dorothy on that plane, I was struck by how similar our stories were and how many other families might be going through the same nightmare. Robert agreed to meet with us only because Dorothy insisted, and only at Michelle's encouragement. She probably thought she could manage the conversation and use it to further isolate Robert from his mother's influence. The meeting took place at Robert's house, a modest ranch home he had shared with his late wife Patricia for 20 years. Michelle answered the door with a warm smile and a concerned expression. "Mrs. Chen," she said to Dorothy, "Robert told me you have been worried about him. I want you to know that I care about your son very much, and I would never do anything to hurt him or come between him and his family." The performance was flawless, exactly like Amanda's had been. But now I knew what to look for. I watched Michelle's eyes while she spoke, and I saw the same cold calculation I had eventually recognized in Amanda. Robert appeared behind Michelle, looking tired and stressed in a way that reminded me painfully of David during the worst months of his marriage to Amanda. "Mom," he said to Dorothy, "I wish you would give Michelle a chance. She makes me happy." "I am sure she does," I said gently. "Robert, my name is Eleanor Mason. I drove here from New Mexico because I went through something very similar to what your mother is worried about." Robert looked confused, but Michelle's expression sharpened with interest. "What do you mean similar?" "I mean I watched my son fall in love with a woman who was not who she claimed to be. A woman who stole our money and was planning to kill my son to collect his life insurance." The room went very quiet. Robert stared at me as if I had said something incomprehensible, while Michelle's mask of concern began to slip slightly. "That is a very serious accusation," Michelle said carefully. "Are you suggesting that I am some kind of criminal?" "I am suggesting that you are Linda Vasquez," I said, watching her reaction. "I am suggesting that you have been married at least 3 times before under different names. And I am suggesting that you have been researching ways to cause heart attacks that look natural." Michelle went very still, and for a moment, I saw the same transformation I had witnessed with Amanda. The caring facade dropping away to reveal the predator underneath. "You have no proof of anything you are saying," she said, her voice completely different now. "Actually," Detective Chen said, appearing in the doorway behind 2 Phoenix police officers, "we have quite a bit of proof." The arrest was swift and efficient. Linda Vasquez was taken into custody while Robert stood in his living room looking like a man whose entire world had just collapsed. After the police left, Dorothy, Robert, and I sat in Robert's kitchen trying to process what had just happened. Robert kept staring at the chair where Michelle had been sitting just an hour earlier. "How could I have been so stupid?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "You were not stupid," Dorothy said firmly. "You were grieving and lonely. And she took advantage of that. These women are professionals, Robert. They study people like you and become exactly who you need them to be." Robert looked at me with eyes full of pain and confusion. "How did you know? How did you figure it out when I could not see what was right in front of me?" "Because I had lived through it," I said. "And because your mother's instincts were right. She knew something was wrong even when she could not explain why." Over the following weeks, the investigation into Linda Vasquez revealed the full scope of her operation. She had stolen over $400,000 from previous victims and had been escalating to murder as a way to access larger insurance payouts. Most disturbing was the discovery that Robert would have been dead within 2 weeks. Linda had already obtained the material she needed to simulate a heart attack and had been planning to act immediately after he changed his will to make her his sole beneficiary. Dorothy and I stayed in Phoenix for Linda's preliminary hearing. Watching her in court, shackled and wearing an orange jumpsuit, I was struck by how ordinary she looked without her carefully crafted persona. During a break in the proceedings, Linda's attorney approached Dorothy and me. "My client wants to speak with you both," he said. We agreed to the meeting, though I was not sure what Linda could possibly want to say to us. Linda sat across from us in the jail conference room, looking nothing like the charming Michelle Parker who had answered Robert's door just a week earlier. "I want you to know," she said without preamble, "that I never intended for anyone to get hurt." "You were planning to murder my son," Dorothy said, her voice steady despite her obvious emotion. Linda was quiet for a long moment. "The money was supposed to be enough," she said finally. "But it never was. There were always expenses, always complications, always reasons why I needed more. So you decided to start killing people," I said. "I decided to stop letting them suffer," Linda replied, as if she were doing her victims a favor. Robert was miserable without his wife. Dorothy was lonely in that nursing home. I gave them happiness for a while, and then I would have ended their pain. The delusion in her statement was breathtaking. Linda had convinced herself that she was performing some kind of mercy by murdering the people who trusted her. What about the others? Yes. The people you stole from before. Were you planning to kill them too? Linda shrugged. Some of them, maybe. It depends on how much they had and how complicated the extraction became. Dorothy stood up abruptly. I have heard enough, she said. Robert is alive, you are in jail, and that is all that matters to me. As we left the jail, Dorothy took my arm. Eleanor, she said, I do not know how to thank you for saving my son's life. You do not need to thank me, I replied. You saved him by trusting your instincts and asking for help. I just had the experience to know what questions to ask. Flying back to New Mexico, I thought about how our nightmare with Amanda had given Dorothy and me the tools to save Robert's life. Sometimes the worst experiences prepare us to prevent even worse experiences for others. Linda Vasquez was eventually sentenced to life in prison without parole for conspiracy to commit murder and multiple counts of marriage fraud. The judge called her operation one of the most callous and calculated schemes he had ever encountered. But more importantly, Robert survived. Dorothy moved closer to her son to help him heal, and together they began the process of rebuilding their relationship and their trust in other people. 6 months later, I received another call. This time it was from a man named Carlos in Texas, whose elderly father was being courted by a woman who claimed to be a retired teacher named Susan Walsh. Over the next 2 years, Dorothy, Detective Chen, and I helped investigate and prevent 4 more marriage fraud schemes. We developed a network of resources and contacts that could quickly verify identities and backgrounds. We also began speaking at senior centers and community groups about the warning signs of marriage fraud. The response was overwhelming. Everywhere we went, people shared stories of relatives or friends who had fallen victim to similar schemes. David and Sarah supported my new mission completely. They helped me create a website where people could report suspicious relationships and get advice about how to investigate concerns about their loved ones. Sarah, with her background in education, developed materials we could distribute about protecting yourself and your family from romantic fraud. David used his business connections to help fund our efforts and expand our reach. Emma was walking now, tottering around Sarah's garden and bringing joy to every day. Watching her grow up surrounded by people who genuinely loved each other reminded me daily of what we had almost lost and what we had ultimately gained. One afternoon, as I was playing with Emma in their backyard, David joined us on the porch swing. Mom, he said, I need to tell you something. I braced myself, wondering if he was having problems with Sarah or concerns about our fraud prevention work. I am proud of you, he said simply. What you have done since Amanda, the way you have turned our worst experience into something that helps other families. I could not be prouder to be your son. The words meant more to me than any thanks or recognition I had received from the families we had helped. My son was proud of me, not just for surviving what Amanda had put us through, but for using that experience to protect others. As Emma played at our feet, chattering in the way toddlers do, I realized that our story had become bigger than just our family. It had become a tool for protecting other families, a warning system for other parents, and proof that survivors can become protectors. That evening, Sarah was putting Emma to bed when my phone rang. It was Detective Chen with news about a case we had been following in Oregon. Eleanor, she said, the woman targeting the Morrison family has been arrested. Your information about the pattern of behavior led to a search warrant that uncovered evidence of fraud in 3 other states. Another family saved, another predator stopped, another reminder that our worst experience had been transformed into something meaningful and protective. Later that night, as I prepared for bed in my comfortable apartment, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this point. 5 years ago, I had been a lonely widow who gave away most of her savings to help a son marry a woman who planned to kill him. Now I was a fraud prevention advocate, a protective grandmother, a trusted resource for families in crisis, and a woman who had learned that strength and wisdom can grow from the deepest betrayals. Amanda Sterling had taken our money, our peace of mind, and our trust in others. But she had also given us purpose, connection, and the knowledge that we could survive anything as long as we had each other. Most importantly, she had taught us that real love, The love between parents and children, between spouses who know each other completely, between families who choose to stay connected through anything, is worth fighting for with everything you have. As I drifted off to sleep that night, I thought about all the families we had helped, all the victims we had prevented, and all the children like Emma who would grow up safer because we had refused to let our pain be meaningless. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give the world is the wisdom that comes from surviving something terrible and choosing to use that wisdom to protect others from the same fate. Thank you for listening to our story. If it helps even one more family avoid what we went through, then every moment of pain was worthwhile. Subscribe to this channel, share our story, and remember, your family is always worth fighting for.